Okay, hi, good evening. I'm Kesha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to this evening's Monday LaRouchePAC Strategic Overview for Monday, August 7th. And tonight we are going to be discussing a new feature on the LaRouchePAC website that I'll pull up momentarily here. And the speaker sort of taking us through these new developments and discussion on the site is going to be Tony Papert today. What we're going to be discussing is the winning the war on drugs in the 21st century and the unconditional surrender. This is actually from the title of a new book that's been published by one of our collaborators, Bob Ingram. Bob was scheduled to be on with us tonight, but unfortunately circumstances prevented him from being on. But I will say now that Bob will be available with us on next week, and I will encourage you once I put his book up and let you know where you can actually get his book. And he and Tony have been working on these developments for a very long time. And the question of the war on drugs, the war on the drug cartels, the war on the financial interests running the drug cartels has been something that the LaRouche Political Action Committee, the LaRouche movement, has been working on and has been calling for a total annihilation of for a very long time. And Tony was one of the key participants in that drive. What back in the day, Mr. LaRouche called Dope Incorporated. There was a book written on this, and there's a lot that's happened since then. The rate of the drug epidemic, the fentanyl crisis, the rate of drugs coming across our border has become a total criminal disaster for our country, for our young people. You, Tony, I'm sure will go through some of the numbers, which you can find in Bob's new book, on the numbers of deaths that's happened through the trafficking across our borders for many years. And this is something that President Donald Trump has put at the forefront of his fight as he's called for declaring war on the drug cartels. And what I wanted to do, I discussed this with Tony for him to comment on in the discussion tonight, is I think many of you know, if you're new on our call, you know that LaRouchePAC has been focusing on the program that President Trump has put out entitled Agenda 47. And I will say again, you can find all of President Trump's Agenda 47 policy statements on his website at donaldjtrump.com/agenda 47. And we feature a number of these on our website as well, really focusing on President Trump's policies for economic development and his policies going after the cartels, the human traffickers, drug traffickers, but really on his Agenda 47 that says what we need to do to build out of this economic crisis. So I'm going to actually play this 4-minute, a little over 4-minute clip of President Trump and his declaring a war on the cartels. And then I'll turn it over to Tony for his opening remarks and discussion. And after that, we'll open it up to you all for discussion and for your questions as well. Okay, so give me 1 second here. And I'll pull that up.
Fentanyl, heroin, meth, and other lethal drugs are pouring across our wide open border, stealing hundreds of thousands of beautiful American lives. And it's happening like never before in our history. Children are being left without parents. Families are being ripped apart. Communities are being decimated. Our neighbors and fellow citizens are having their entire worlds destroyed like nobody thought possible. Our country is being poisoned from within by the drugs and by all of the other crime that's taking place. The drug cartels are waging war in America, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels. In this war, Joe Biden has sided against the United States and with the cartels. They are making more money than, and it's now time for America to wage war on the cartels. In this war, Joe Biden has sided against the United States and with the cartels. They are making more money than they've ever made before, times 10. There's never been anything like it. They're major, major companies. They're bigger than even some of our biggest companies. Biden's open border policies are a deadly betrayal of our nation. When I am president, it will be the policy of the United States to take down the cartels, just as we took down ISIS and the ISIS caliphate, and just as, unlike the situation we're in today, we had a very, very strong border, the strongest border, in fact, in the history of our country. And drugs were at a low of 45 years. There's been nothing like what we did just 2 years ago. We will show no mercy on the cartels. Every day, drug traffickers are using the waters of our region to ship their lethal poisons to America, killing so many of our people and ruining families. In addition to restoring strong border security, I will deploy all necessary military assets, including the US Navy, to impose the full naval embargo on the cartels. I did that before and it worked. What we did was incredible. We will guarantee that the waters of the Western Hemisphere are not used to traffic illicit drugs to our country. Furthermore, I will order the Department of Defense to make appropriate use of special forces, cyber warfare, and other overt and covert actions to inflict maximum damage on cartel leadership, infrastructure, and operations. I will designate the major cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. We will sever their access to global financial systems. I will also work to forge an unprecedented partnership with neighboring governments in our region, just like I did in Mexico. And remember, in Mexico alone, an estimated 100,000 civilians have been tragically murdered or gone missing at the hands of these cartels. The Mexican government and the president is really working hard, but it's not working out. These cartels are vicious and they're violent, and they have Mexico for now stymied. But we have to help Mexico and we have to stymie the cartels. Either we will get the full cooperation of other governments to stop this menace, or we will expose every bribe, every kickback, every payoff, and every bit of corruption that is allowing the cartels to preserve their brutal reign. And it is indeed brutal. Finally, as I have said before, I will ask Congress to pass legislation ensuring that drug smugglers and human traffickers receive the death penalty. The drug cartels and their allies in the Biden administration have the blood of countless millions on their hands. Millions and millions of families and people are being destroyed. When I'm back in the White House, the drug kingpins and vicious traffickers will never sleep soundly again. We did it once and we did it better than anybody else. There's never been a better border than we had just 2 years ago. It was strong, it was powerful, and it was respected all over the world. And now we're laughed at all over the world. And we're not going to let that happen much longer. We have to take over. We have to be tough. We have to be smart. We have to be fair. But if we don't do something immediately, our country is gone.
Okay, Tony, I'm going to bring you in here, but I just want to reiterate, highlight the key points that President Trump made and open it up for your discussions on what needs to be done, which I think people should really pay attention to. And Lyndon LaRouche and his fight against the drug traffickers for many decades really took on a lot of the policies that President Trump called for naval embargo, imposing a full naval embargo, special forces for cyber warfare against the cartels, designating the cartels a foreign terrorist organization, and severing access to global financial systems. As he said, we know this hasn't been done under President Biden, who is protecting the cartels, and it definitely was not done under Obama and Eric Holder, his attorney general. So you might want to get into that. But with that, that's the opening, and I want to go ahead and bring you in.
Thank you.
1 second. Let me.
You think you could
and-
show the post on Bob's book?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Want me to do that now?
Yeah, if you would.
Okay. 1 second. And here we are. This is the post. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, Bob Ingram just published a book available on Amazon. The title is Unconditional Surrender, Robert Ingram. That's the cover. And it's a in-depth and extremely up-to-date look at the origins of the crisis, the cause of it, and the whole dimensions of it, including in China, in Mexico, in the offshore banking system, in the onshore system here in the United States, New York, and other centers, and what has to be done for an annihilation war on the drug cartels. That's why he calls it unconditional surrender, winning the war on drugs in the 21st century. So this post on LaRouchePAC gives you something of an overview of the book, the table of contents, chapter 10, which is the war on drugs, pulling it together toward the end of the book, and the ordering information for it on Amazon. So as Kesha said, Bob intended to be with us tonight, but he was forced to cancel. So I agreed to stand in. So as that post begins, and Bob's book really begins, we've lost 350,000 Americans to drug overdoses, mostly fentanyl, over the past 3 years. That is more Americans for today's much greater population than were killed in combat in World War II. So in a mere 3 years, the drug cartels and those citizens above suspicion who were facilitating their work and working with them have killed more Americans than Hitler and the Japanese Empire did in the entirety of World War II. And as Bob has recounted at times, I think also in his book, there at a recent congressional hearing on drug money laundering, a specialist on drug money laundering asked the congressman if foreign terrorists came here with ricin or some other extremely powerful poison and wiped out 100,000 Americans, what would we do? Obviously, we would effectively do a total mobilization and go to war if we had any sense. But this is exactly what's been happening every year for 3 years. The number is over by now, over 100,000 killed by the cartels, mostly by fentanyl. And what are we doing? Well, the Biden administration is really doing nothing. States and cities in many cases are trying to fight, but there's no way they can overcome the problem. They can make a dent locally, but the problem, as you see, is an international one, and one, as I say, which also involves complicity of our citizens above suspicion. So it's nothing that state and local government can solve. And I mean, you look at this, as terrible as it is, there's another aspect to it, which is that between fentanyl and then, often so-called legal drugs, and marijuana is often legal, and then the tremendous amount of other drugging of our young people with Ritalin, with antidepressants, with other drugs, we are losing our younger generation to death of fentanyl and to addiction to other drugs, as well as fentanyl. And drug addiction is slavery. I mean, as Bob points out in the book in detail, drug addiction is a form of slavery which has been used by colonial administrations, the British, the Dutch, and others, the French, to enslave populations so that they don't resist. Drugs are slavery. And this drug epidemic is a slavery inflicted on our population, especially on our young people. And of course, as I say, it's not only fentanyl. Bob in his book goes through many other aspects, which I've only indicated. It's not only fentanyl, even though that's the worst aspect of it. The lethal, the immediate, often immediately lethal aspect of it. Now, I mean, it's not, this fentanyl scourge is not a thing in itself by any means. Just look, even when you begin to look at it, you see what? You see crime. This massive increase in crime in our country, much of it is connected with dope addiction, and much of it is connected, even particularly with fentanyl, with addicts needing money for fentanyl, engaging in all kinds of mass crime, which has been enabled by the George Soros campaign for releasing criminals and other aspects of anti-law enforcement in the United States. Homelessness. I mean, if you look, as Bob actually has in other writings, and others have, if you look at the homeless crisis is to a large extent a crisis of homeless addicts, especially homeless fentanyl addicts. I mean, if you take a place like San Francisco, and it is by no means the only place of this sort, with open air drug dealing, and in some cases, drug dealing with government support, or drug use, open air, not dealing, but open air drug use with government support. Sites of open air drug use are typically nuclei of spreading homelessness. The addicts come there to get their fix, and they often don't leave. They need the fix and stay there for the next fix, and you have the nucleus of homelessness, which is very largely, as people who've investigated it, Chris Rufo, Michael Schellenberger, the homeless crisis is, to a large extent, a crisis of addiction and mental illness. And mental illness often stems from the addiction and is exacerbated by the addiction. So, and these are not themselves, as many of you realize full well, these themselves are fed by other factors. But this drug pestilence, this plague of especially fentanyl addiction in our country, is at the center of massive, crippling social plagues, pestilences, which are taking the guts out of our country, and particularly of our younger generations. Now, I mean, briefly to deal, and again, Bob does much more in-depth treatment of it in his book, but briefly to deal with the onset of fentanyl during the most recent years as the critical drug. Of course, fentanyl is not grown in fields, as is cocaine and heroin. It's produced in laboratories, which means that production is much easier to conceal. It's much easier to conceal, you know, a lab, maybe hidden in a house or someplace, than fields of crops. It's 100-fold, I believe, more potent than heroin, and therefore it's much easier to smuggle because it's much smaller in volume, easier to conceal, and so forth. Now, I mean, there would appear to be a change in business model when we go from heroin to fentanyl. And of course, fentanyl has largely, not completely, displaced heroin in the United States. For one thing, because you're killing off so many of your customers, even at the first fix, at the first dose. Many die of an overdose at the first dose. Many of those don't even know they were consuming fentanyl. They thought there was something else. They had purchased, they thought, oxycodone pills or some other pills. They got a pill which looked like oxycodone or something else. It really was fentanyl or contained fentanyl, and they get an immediate overdose because they were never exposed to it before. So what kind of business model is this when you kill off your customers at such huge numbers? Now, there's questions to be answered there, but the thing which it has to be coupled with that, and again, many of you know this, but others don't, is that fentanyl is being mixed with almost everything, with cocaine, with meth, with downers, with all different kinds of drugs. And what's the reason for that? The reason is to addict users to fentanyl. As fast as they're killing them off on the one hand, the reason is to addict people who didn't even want fentanyl, who didn't know they were getting it, who are getting it, and become, because it's extremely addictive, and become fentanyl addicts overnight or within a short period of time. So that's the business model. It's wiping out our people, it's murdering our young people, and it's at the same time spreading addiction at rates which were never seen before, certainly in this country. A critical moment, as actually Kesha indicated in her opening remarks, a critical moment in this was the pro-drug Obama administration, which, shut down anti-drug programs, which sent under Operation Fast and Furious, which sent weapons to the Mexican drug cartels, which encouraged legalization of drugs, which ended basically enforcement. So the Obama administration was a key turning point in the massive pit of addiction, which we find ourselves in now in 2023. Trump took successful actions against it, as he indicated in the video which you saw. Very importantly, and he got Mexico's help to seal the Mexican border. So this was, and Mexico, as you probably recall, sent 29,000 troops to seal the US-Mexico border between the ports of entry. So he got the help of Mexico. He got the help of China. Before Trump came to office, most fentanyl, not all, but most fentanyl, in some sense, originates in Chinese labs or labs run by Chinese organized crime. But, and when Trump came to office, that fentanyl was being distributed by parcel services, the post office, FedEx, and so forth, into the United States. Trump got that shut down. He got China to shut down fentanyl. What remained was so-called fentanyl precursors, meaning fentanyl, again, it's made in a lab. It can be synthesized in a wide variety of ways from a significant number of different chemicals. These were being produced in China and then being finally synthesized into fentanyl in labs in Mexico. But Trump got China to act against that. China did thousands of fentanyl arrests per their agreement with Donald Trump. So he got both the Chinese and Mexicans to act against the problem, as he indicated correctly in that tape. Now, since Biden came in, let me go back, I'm sorry, just to fill in. So as Bob goes through in his book, the predominant pattern of fentanyl coming into the United States involves the cooperation between Chinese organized crime called the Triads, which is a worldwide Chinese language organized crime network or series of networks centered in Chinese communities, Chinatown, in US, Canada, and many other countries. But ultimately, as far as we can see, headquartered in Hong Kong. This is not the same thing as the Chinese government. The Chinese organized crime and the Triads are actually centuries older than the current Chinese government. And they operate in conjunction with the Mexican cartels. The total interlink may not be completely known, but as I said, labs run by Chinese organized crime or their influence generally, and not in all cases, produce the precursors. They're typically made into finished fentanyl in Mexico. There's Chinese gangsters often present in Mexico in these processes. They're brought to the United States and frequently and sold here through various kinds of organized crime gangs, including the well-known Central American gangs. And then here you find Chinese organized crime playing a role of money laundering, which is a new kind of money laundering based on smartphone apps, encoded communications, WeChat and encoded WeChat and other things used by Chinese organized crime to move money around through encoded apps. The money laundering also involves the offshore banking apparatus. This is what is at root completely unregulated secret banking institutions in typically British colonies, such as the British Virgin Islands, the Channel Islands. They're banking sites, which I say are unregistered, or they're registered where they are, but they're unregulated. Their accounts are anonymous. The attempt is that the activities through these centers are untraceable. So these cooperate with Chinese organized crime and the money laundering, and it goes from the offshore system into the regular banking system. As Bob exposes in his book, the offshore banking system has been taken onshore into the United States in many states, so that from the offshore banking system to the offshore onshore banking system, it's a short hop to many of the big New York banks, which have been caught repeatedly in billions of dollars of drug money laundering, which they can't deny. But nobody ever goes to jail. The federal government, the Department of Justice, engages in so-called deferred prosecution agreements, saying, well, we'll give you a fine, and the fine is a few $100 million at most. No relation to the magnitude of the money they're laundering. And they're never prosecuted, as nobody is ever sent to jail, just as nobody was sent to jail for all the fraud in the 2008 banking collapse. So these are the citizens above suspicion who facilitate, and without paying any penalty for it, who facilitate the murder through drugs of over 100,000 Americans a year, and continually increasing. in chapter 10 of his book, which we have for you to read on the LaRouchePAC site in the post that Kesha showed on the screen, Bob Ingram, the author, gives his proposals for Shut Down Dope Inc., for the war, the Annihilation Wars, we call it, for unconditional surrender of the dope cartels. And this stems both from LaRouche's proposals in a 1985 Mexico City speech for a war on drugs, and Trump's proposals in the video which was just shown, and the other proposals he's made to shut down Dope Incorporated. So the first aspect that Bob discusses is what LaRouche called a treaty of military alliance to destroy the enemy quasi-state. That LaRouche noted that the drug cartels, and this is even more true today than when he said this in 1985, the drug cartels have the military power equivalent to a nation state. And really, they have greater military power than several of the smaller nation states in the Americas. I mean, if you've seen some of the films from the border, now our fake news is not so happy about these films and may not show them. But if you see some of the films from the border, you see, visible from the US side of the border, just on the other side, because we have no enforcement, you see Mexican cartels with armored personnel carriers, like are being used in Ukraine. You see Mexican cartels with American anti-tank weapons, using anti-tank weapons against the armored personnel carriers of other cartels who are fighting them, or potentially any government that would fight them. And many of these things have come from the weapons that you and I have sent to Ukraine. And of course, were sold by the Zelensky government or corrupt people, generals or others within it, and wound up with the cartels. So LaRouche said, these cartels have a power like a nation state. And the nation states of the hemisphere, and most importantly, but not exclusively, Mexico and the US, have got to engage in a military-style alliance against these cartels as military powers. And that means, as Donald Trump laid out in the video that Kesha showed, in his own words, but very clear, it means that we can't afford to sacrifice Mexican sovereignty, or other nations in the hemisphere, that we want to strengthen Mexican sovereignty against the cartels. And therefore, we want a military alliance with Mexico, which respects the sovereignty of both sides. And also in that context, as LaRouche said, in this war, providing aid and comfort to the enemy, as some of our friends in Wall Street would like to do, is equivalent to treason. Then the second point that Bob makes in there is controlling the production and shipment of fentanyl precursors. This will likely involve difficult negotiations with China and with other nations. Some precursors are being manufactured in India, and there may be other locations too, but as I said, mostly in China. Bob says, wiping out the murderous drug gangs in the United States. This will require going beyond mere local law enforcement, and again will be military in nature, which is, it's also necessary. And well, everything Bob said there was true. The other thing I would add is something which Trump has frequently said, he didn't have to say in this video, which is that what we have to do is instantly deport any illegal immigrants who are members of criminal gangs, because many of them are. And if you deport all of them, you'll make a big, which they, of course, they merit immediate deportation. If you deport all of them, you'll make an immediate big crack in this problem of Central American criminal gangs, which, the MS-18, which is the best known, was actually formed in California from Salvadoran immigrants there. He calls to dismantle the money laundering apparatus. Domestically, this means no more deferred prosecution agreements for violators. Jail time, seizure of assets, and other measures will be applied on everyone, from the lowly mobile phone money launderer, whom I discussed a minute ago, to the largest Wall Street banks. Jail for bank executives in the cases which have been subject to deferred plea agreements. There's no question but that the banks knew what they were doing. And that's why they couldn't go to trial, because they were guilty and they knew it. All the evidence was there. So we're tired of doing that. The hour is late, as I said at the very beginning. Our younger generation, on which we depend to continue this country and our values, is being destroyed as we speak today. And if we have to jail some Wall Street bankers, we will. Bob goes on, stopping the flow of fentanyl and other hard drugs from entering the country. Seal the border, naval blockade where appropriate. And as Trump said in that film strip, or that video that was shown, he did apply naval blockade. LaRouche also asked for this in 1985. I think we should do what Colonel McGregor has called for repeatedly in his interviews, which is take the US troops from Europe, where we don't need them. Nobody's going to attack us from Europe. It's insane that we have all these troops there. Take them from Europe and put them on the southern border where we do need them. We're not being attacked from Europe. We're being attacked over our own southern border, not by the Mexican government, but by these dope cartels. Bob says measures to break the power of the larger banking and financial network, which makes it possible for the financial wheels of Dope Inc. to run smoothly. This will involve a particular focus on the offshore financial havens. This means secrecy no more. Secrecy no more in these offshore financial havens. They're going to have to give it up. Otherwise, American banks will be, and American citizens will be prohibited from dealing with them. We also, as part of the whole program for the American system, for a rebirth of the American system of political economy, we're going to have to institute Glass-Steagall to separate out the speculative financial activity from real banking, and that will also mean far stricter banking regulation. And then, in conclusion, Bob, and this you can read on the site, Bob discusses what he calls the need for partners, and that, talking about military measures against Mexico, which would be crazy. The Mexican government is on our side, not on Biden's side. The president of Mexico has often said how he had a working alliance with the United States under Trump, and he no longer has with Biden. So, the president of Mexico is on our side. our military. He doesn't need our military action or anything of the sort. He would like to join us and see Mexico no longer subject to these cartels, which have, as President Trump said, they have disappeared 100,000 Mexicans, disappeared or killed 100,000 Mexicans within, I think, the past year. Now, similarly, the government of China. The government of China worked with President Trump on these issues. Once Biden came in and allowed Nancy Pelosi to travel to Taiwan in a provocative move against China, which Trump opposed, that China cut off all anti-drug cooperation with the US. So where Chinese and American law enforcement under Trump, especially before COVID, had been working major drug cases together and rounding up criminals in China who were subject to very draconian justice. All this ended under Biden because of provocative measures against China. And obviously, that's where his values lie. The value of cooperation with China to shut down these drugs is not as great in Biden's eyes as the value of provocation of China, leading us toward a war in the Pacific when we already substantively are at war against Russia in Ukraine. So, the situations are different. Obviously, China is a very different kind of government from that of Mexico. China is a so-called communist government, although that's not exactly, it's nothing like the old Soviet Union. But situations are entirely different. But in both cases, organized crime looms large in Mexico and in China. The responsible leaders of both countries don't want to be beholden to organized crime. They don't want organized crime to carry so much power, of course, much more in Mexico than it does in China. And they have been amenable to cooperation with President Trump in the past. They will be again. We can work together to shut down this plague. And then the final section of that chapter, as you can read, is the fifth column in the United States. Not only the people above suspicion on Wall Street, whom I've mentioned so many times, but the drug legalizers and the drug non-enforcers in the United States. Not to speak of the problem I alluded to at the beginning, much larger than fentanyl, much larger in numbers, not necessarily much bigger as a problem, but much bigger numbers in the legalized drugging and the medical drugging of, for instance, hundreds of thousands of children with Ritalin and other psychoactive drugs. So, excuse me. So that's, a brief look at the problem, and perhaps can serve as a basis for discussion. I'd really like to hear what those of you on the call think about these things.